The pages smelled faintly of his cologne, that clean, woody scent that used to mean comfort. Every morning, Daniel Lee, when I first opened that ledger, my hands shook so badly I almost dropped it. And for a moment, I wanted to believe it was just an old business notebook. But then I saw the names, the dates, the gifts, rows and rows of them, written in his tidy engineer's handwriting. I remember whispering to myself, "One affair, huh?" And the sound of my own voice, quiet in that empty study, was more chilling than any scream. Before all this, we were the sort of couple people described as steady. Married 16 years. 2 kids, Evan, 14, and little Grace, 9. A modest home on the edge of town, the kind with magnolias out front, and a white fence that always needed painting. FT before sunrise. He'd kiss my forehead, coffee thermos in hand, muttering something about a meeting or a deadline. I'd pack lunches, nag Evan about his socks, braid Grace's hair while the kettle whistled. Our life was ordinary in the best way. Safe, predictable, wrapped in the hum of routine. Daniel was a civil engineer, precise, reliable, the sort of man who balanced his checkbook to the penny. He had a quiet smile that came out only when he thought no one was watching. I used to catch him smiling at me across the dinner table when Grace told one of her knock-knock jokes, and I'd think, this is what peace feels like. On weekends, he'd mow the lawn while I hung laundry on the back line. Sometimes I'd watch him from the kitchen window, sweat darkening the back of his shirt, that familiar curve of his shoulders. And I'd feel grateful. We'd been through our share of storms, but we were still here. That illusion held until the spring he started coming home late. At first, it was small things. The smell of a different shampoo on his collar. Muted phone calls in the hallway. A new password on his laptop. I told myself it was work stress. His company had taken on a new project. Maybe that's why he seemed distracted. But something about his eyes. They didn't meet mine anymore. One night, after the kids were asleep, I asked, "Are you okay? You've been somewhere else lately." He looked up from his laptop, tired, and said, "It's nothing, Anna, just deadlines. Don't start imagining things." The way he said "don't start" made me feel small, like I was a child being scolded for curiosity. A week later, I found a gold bracelet tucked in the glove compartment of his car. It wasn't mine. When I asked, he said it was a client's, something she left at the office. I wanted to believe him. God help me, I did. Because when you've built 16 years with someone, you don't just tear it apart over a bracelet. But I started watching him differently. The way he rushed his showers. How he'd check his phone under the table. How he smelled faintly of jasmine one night when he came home from the gym. It happened 2 months later, on an ordinary Tuesday. The kids were at school. I was cleaning his study, something I rarely did because Daniel hated anyone touching his files. But the dust on the shelves was thick, and I needed to feel useful that morning. His desk drawer was locked. Nothing new. But when I reached under to plug in the vacuum, my fingers brushed against a thin leather-bound book, wedged between the floorboard and the bottom panel. It was hidden, deliberately. I hesitated. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. Maybe it was nothing. Just work notes, invoices, calculations. But curiosity is a dangerous thing when your heart already suspects the truth. I opened it. Inside, the first page was neat. Expenses, personal. And beneath that, a list. June 3rd, dinner. Sorella's, $180 June 5th. Roses, $65 June 12th. Hotel, $320. A name beside each entry. And then another name. And another. Different ones. Some crossed out. Some with little hearts drawn next to them. My throat closed. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. This wasn't one mistake. This was a catalog. A record of every woman, every lie, every dollar he spent keeping it all hidden. I read until the lines blurred. My hands went numb. 6 years. That's how far back the entries went. I heard the front door creak open. Daniel, Home early. Panic surged. I slammed the ledger shut, shoved it under a pile of papers, and forced a smile when he walked in. He looked tired, but his eyes scanned the room too quickly. "What are you doing in here?" "Just dusting," I said. My voice cracked. He nodded slowly, then his gaze landed on the desk. For a split second, something dark flickered across his face. Fear? Anger? And I knew. He knew I'd found something. That night I lay beside him, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. My mind replayed every lie, every late night, every excuse. 6 years. 6 years of my life spent loving a man who kept a ledger of his betrayals like it was a tax record. By dawn, I'd made a decision. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there, eyes open, watching the faint orange glow from the streetlight move across the ceiling. Every few minutes, Daniel would turn over and I'd freeze, heart hammering, afraid he'd see the storm behind my eyes. By sunrise, I had mapped out my plan. Not revenge, not yet. First, I needed truth. When you love someone for that long, betrayal doesn't hit all at once. It leaks through you, drop by drop, until it fills every corner of your mind. I still wanted to hear him say it, to see if he would lie even then. He came down to breakfast like nothing had changed. White shirt, navy tie, coffee mug in hand. He smiled, or rather, performed a smile, and said, "Morning, Anna. You're up early." The way his voice sounded, casual, almost light, made my stomach twist. I slid a plate of eggs toward him. "Couldn't sleep," I said. "Something on your mind?" I shook my head. "Just thinking about bills." He nodded, grateful for a boring answer. I studied him as he ate, the small habits I'd memorized over the years. How he folded his napkin in half before placing it on his lap. How he always chewed twice before swallowing. How his left eyebrow twitched when he was anxious. That twitch was there now. When he left for work, I followed him to the window and watched his car disappear down the street. Then I went back to the study. I opened the ledger again, slower this time. My hands trembled less. Anger steadied them. Each name carried a story I didn't know. There was CL, Roses and Dinner. Marissa, Weekend in Denver. Shelley, Ring, Silver. Each line felt like a nail hammered into the coffin of our marriage. At the end of the ledger, I found a folded receipt, a hotel invoice dated just 2 weeks ago. 2 guests. 2 nights. Room 407, and underneath, in his handwriting, M, likes red wine. Prefers cash gifts. That was when something inside me hardened. It wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was purpose. For the next 3 days, I lived a double life. By day, I was the same wife, cooking dinner, helping with homework, laughing when Grace spilled juice. By night, I was a detective. I took photos of every ledger page with my phone. I cross-checked the dates with his supposed business trips. They matched perfectly. I called his assistant, pretending to confirm a hotel booking for next month. She casually mentioned he had one canceled back in Denver. Denver. There it was again. That Friday, I drove to the hotel listed on the last receipt. I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe a confession, maybe an explanation. But instead, I met a young woman at the front desk with a polite smile who said, "Oh, Mr. Turner." "Yes, he stays with us quite often." Her words hit me like a slap. I asked, "Does he usually travel alone?" She hesitated. "I'm not sure I can—" I slipped her a 20. She lowered her voice. "Usually a woman checks in with him. Red hair, maybe early 30s. Red hair. Emma likes red wine. My knees almost gave out. That evening, Daniel came home, humming, like he hadn't built a castle of lies around us. He kissed my cheek, poured himself a whiskey, and sat down at the dining table, scrolling his phone. I stood at the kitchen counter, the ledger in my hands. He didn't notice until I placed it in front of him. The color drained from his face. "Where did you get that?" "Under your desk," I said softly. My voice sounded foreign, calm, steady, almost kind. He reached for it, but I pulled it back. "Don't," I warned. "You'll smear the ink. Wouldn't want to lose your bookkeeping." "Anna," he started. You don't understand. I think I do. I flipped to a random page and read aloud. Marisa, weekend in Denver. Room 407, 2 nights. Red wine. He closed his eyes. I made mistakes. Mistakes? I laughed. The sound broke halfway out of my throat. That's what you call 6 years of secret women? You kept records, Daniel. He opened his mouth again, but I held up my hand. Don't insult me with excuses. I want truth. How many? He stared at me, jaw tight. 1. I slammed the ledger onto the table so hard the whiskey glass jumped. Count the pages, I hissed. That's not 1, Daniel. That's your whole second life. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, I didn't mean to hurt you. The way he said it, as if my pain were a side effect, not the consequence, nearly broke me. I walked to the window, gripping the curtain edge until my knuckles whitened. You know what's funny? I said quietly. All these years I defended you. Every time my mother said you seemed distant, I told her she was wrong. Every time I doubted myself, I said, he's a good man. I built you a temple in my mind, Daniel, and you turned it into a motel. He flinched. Anna, please. Save it. I left him at the table and went upstairs. That night, I slept in Grace's room on the floor beside her bed. She stirred once, half asleep, whispering, Mommy? I stroked her hair and said, Go back to sleep, baby. Mommy's just here tonight. In the dark, I planned my next step. I wasn't going to scream or throw things. That's not who I am. But silence can be louder than rage. The next morning, I packed Daniel's lunch as usual, kissed his cheek, and smiled like nothing had changed. He looked uneasy, but relieved. That was good. I wanted him calm. When he left, I called my friend Layla, who worked at a local community magazine. I told her I had a story idea, something about financial deceit inside marriages. She perked up immediately. I didn't. Plan to publish anything yet? I just needed to know how exposure worked, what evidence mattered, what names could be hidden. She explained everything, how anonymous sources were protected, how financial patterns could be verified. By the time we hung up, my plan had shape. That evening, I pretended to sort through bills at the table while Daniel watched TV. I took photos of his payslips, credit card statements, travel reimbursements, every document that could prove how much of our family's money he'd used to fund his lies. Each click of the camera was like reclaiming a piece of my dignity. When I finally looked up, he was asleep on the couch. The ledger lay where I'd left it, half hidden under the cushion. I picked it up, held it for a long time, and whispered, You taught me how to count, Daniel. Now let's see what your numbers add up to. For the next week, I moved like a ghost through my own house. Everything looked the same dishes in the sink, the same ticking of the wall clock. But I wasn't the same. It's strange how silence can feel heavier than shouting. Daniel noticed it too. He started asking small, nervous questions. Are you mad at me? Have you told anyone? Can we talk? Each time I answered gently, No, Daniel, not now. It unnerved him more than anger ever could. I spent my days collecting proof, one careful piece at a time. Layla, my friend at the magazine, helped me quietly. She taught me how to compare bank statements, how to track withdrawals made in cash, hotel bookings under alternate cards. I didn't need to catch him with anyone new. The numbers spoke loud enough. One afternoon, while checking his old email backups, I found a folder titled Invoices Clients. Inside, the same pattern repeated: payments to flower shops, boutique hotels, jewelry stores. Some receipts were even disguised as client gifts. My husband hadn't just cheated on me, he'd funded his affairs with our family's money. That was the line for me. Cheating wounds your heart. Stealing from your children's future. That kills something deeper. I printed every document and stored them in a plain manila envelope marked Tax Records 2018, the kind of thing no one would ever open. The breaking point came the night of his company's quarterly dinner. Daniel insisted I come. It's important for appearances, he said, carefully neutral. I agreed, smiling. Of course, I'll be there. I remember that night vividly, the way my reflection looked in the mirror as I put on my navy dress, how calm my face appeared while my stomach churned. The event was held at a private dining room downtown. White linen tablecloths, polished silverware, a dozen colleagues and their spouses laughing too loudly over wine. Daniel moved among them like a man who owned the world, hand on my back, the picture of success. Halfway through the evening, I excused myself and went to the restroom. From my clutch, I pulled out a small USB drive. Layla had helped me load a few of the client gift receipts, the ones that clearly showed how Daniel's expenses were anything but professional. I slipped it into an envelope labeled for internal audit, urgent. Then, on my way back, I placed it quietly in the jacket pocket of his company's finance director. I didn't say a word all night. I just smiled. 2 days later, the cracks began to show. Daniel came home late, his tie loosened, eyes wide and red. They've started an internal review, he muttered, pouring himself a drink. For what? I asked softly. Someone reported discrepancies in expense accounts. They're checking everyone's statements. I hid my trembling hands beneath the table. That sounds serious, I said. Do they suspect you? He stared at me for a long moment. I don't know. Maybe. Over the next few weeks, the tension in the house grew unbearable. He was constantly on calls, whispering, snapping at the kids, chain-smoking on the porch, something he hadn't done in years. Then, one Friday evening, it happened. He came home pale, sweat beading on his forehead. They suspended me, he said. Pending investigation. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap. I see, I said. Do they know about everything? He looked at me sharply. What do you mean, everything? I met his gaze. Your ledger, Daniel. Your records. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. That's when I realized he finally understood it wasn't a random audit. The next morning, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. His supervisor, his brother, the bank. Apparently, someone had leaked information, anonymously, to the company board and to the local paper. I hadn't planned for it to go public, but Layla warned me. Once evidence leaves your hands, the truth has a way of finding light. By Monday, a small online article appeared. Engineer suspended over misuse of company funds. Personal expenditures raise questions in internal review. They didn't name him directly, but our town was small. Everyone knew. At the grocery store, people avoided my eyes. Some whispered, others offered polite condolences that felt like pity. But strangely, I wasn't ashamed. He was. That night, he confronted me. Was it you? He shouted. Did you tell them? His voice echoed off the kitchen walls. The kids were upstairs, door shut tight, pretending not to hear. I stood at the sink, washing a single plate slowly. I didn't tell them anything they didn't already have, I said quietly. You told them. In your handwriting. He slammed his fist on the counter. The plate slipped from my hands and shattered. Grace screamed from upstairs. That sound, my daughter's fear, snapped something inside me. I turned to him, voice trembling but clear. Get out, Daniel. For tonight. For a week. For however long it takes for me to look at you without wanting to throw every dish in this house. He stared at me, eyes wild, and then, for the first time in months, he looked small. He gathered a few clothes, muttering under his breath, and left. The door shut softly, like the final line in a story that had run too long. The next morning was quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like standing in an empty church after the congregation's gone home. Grace asked where Daddy was. I told her, he's staying somewhere else for a little while. She nodded solemnly, like she already knew. Later that day, I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I'd once found the ledger. The sunlight caught the wood grain, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a battlefield. I opened a notebook and started writing. Not a ledger of lies, a journal of truth. Each entry began the same way. Today, I did not blame myself. And that, I decided, would be my new routine. For weeks after Daniel left, I lived in a strange half-world. The house felt quieter but somehow larger, as if space itself had returned to me. There were no late-night phone calls, no lingering scent of whiskey or guilt, just the steady rhythm of the washing machine, the soft hum of the fridge, the small tender sounds of normal life trying to restart. It's surprising how grief sneaks up on you even when you know you did the right thing. Sometimes I'd wake at 3 a.m., expecting to hear him beside me, the rustle of the sheets, the sigh he made when he turned. But the bed stayed cold, and I would stare at the ceiling, wondering how a life can split open so quietly. Eventually, routine became medicine. I started taking early walks before the kids woke up. The morning air smelled of wet grass and new beginnings. Neighbors would wave. Some avoided me, unsure what to say. I didn't mind. For the first time, I didn't need anyone's version of my story but my own. I went back to work part-time at the small accounting office downtown. Numbers made sense to me. They didn't lie. At lunch, I'd sit by the window, sip tea, and watch people passing by with briefcases and coffee cups, each carrying their own invisible stories. At home, Evan helped around the house more, suddenly older than his years. Grace drew little notes that said, "Mommy, you are brave." I kept one pinned to the fridge, right where the grocery list used to hang. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of my reflection in the hallway mirror, tired eyes, a few new lines, but behind them, a steadiness I hadn't seen before. 3 months after Daniel moved out, he called. It was a Tuesday evening. His voice sounded smaller somehow, like the echo of a man who used to fill a room. "Anna," he said, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry." I sat down at the kitchen table, the same spot where everything had fallen apart. "Are you sorry?" I asked. "Because you lost your job or because you lost your family?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "Both," he admitted. "I've been in therapy. I'm trying to understand why I did what I did." I looked at the sunlight fading across the countertop, the orange glow turning to dusk. "That's good," I said. "Understanding is the first step, but it doesn't erase what you did." "I know," he said quietly. "I just needed to tell you that I miss the way you used to look at me." That line, simple, aching, pierced something soft inside me. Because he was right. There had been a time I looked at him like he was the safest place in the world. But I also knew that the woman who loved him like that no longer existed. She'd been replaced by someone stronger, someone who loved herself more. "I hope," I told him, "that one day you learn to look at yourself the way I used to, with honesty." And then I hung up. Forgiveness didn't come like lightning. It came in small, quiet moments, like when I found one of his old shirts while cleaning and didn't cry, or when Grace asked if Daddy could come to her recital and I said yes without bitterness. When he showed up that evening, sitting at the back of the auditorium, I didn't feel anger, just distance. The safe kind. The kind that means you finally stepped out of someone else's shadow. After the performance, Grace ran to him, and for a moment I saw the man I used to know, clumsy, smiling, trying to make amends. I let them have their moment. Later that night, as I tucked Grace into bed, she whispered, "Mommy, are you happy now?" I smiled. "I'm learning to be." "That counts, right?" She nodded solemnly, satisfied. A few months later, I decided to move Daniel's things out of the storage room. Not out of anger, just space. As I packed the last box, I found that ledger again. For a long moment, I held it, remembering how it once felt like proof of my foolishness. Now it felt like proof of survival. I took it outside to the backyard, tore the pages out one by one, and dropped them into the fire pit. The paper curled and blackened, turning his meticulous notes into silent ash. Evan came outside and stood beside me. He didn't ask what it was. He just watched the smoke rise. After a while, he said, "Does burning it make it better?" I thought for a moment. "It doesn't fix the past," I said, "but it makes room for the future." He nodded and slipped his hand into mine. We stood there until the last ember went dark. In time, the house no longer felt like a memory of him. I painted the study pale green, planted herbs in the windowsill, replaced the framed wedding photo with Grace's drawing of our family, just the three of us, smiling. Some nights I'd sit by the window with a cup of tea and watch the quiet street, the neighbor's porch light flickering in the dark. The world had gone on, and so had I. There are still moments when I smell his cologne in a crowd or hear a song we used to dance to, when my chest tightens. But I remind myself, pain is just the echo of love learning to let go. And maybe, in its own way, that's a kind of grace. When people ask me what hurt the most, I tell them, it wasn't the lies. It was the way I kept choosing to believe them, long after I knew better. Sometimes we hold on to the version of a person we built in our minds, and it takes losing them to realize that version never truly existed. But if there's one thing this whole story taught me, it's that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the start of your becoming. I used to think strength meant holding everything together, smiling through the cracks, pretending my world hadn't fallen apart. Now I know real strength is quieter. It's getting up every morning when your heart still aches, packing the kids' lunches, opening the curtains and saying to yourself, "Not today, pain. Not forever." I don't hate Daniel anymore. I don't forgive him, not entirely, but I understand that broken people break others, and healing only begins when you stop letting their cracks cut you. So if you're listening to this, and someone has lied to you, used you, made you feel small for trusting them, please remember, you are not foolish for loving. Love is never the mistake. Staying where love has died is. I built a new life from the ashes of that ledger. A life that smells like morning coffee and freshly folded laundry. That sounds like my daughter's laughter and my son humming as he sets the table. It's not perfect, but it's peaceful. And peace, I've learned, is the sweetest form of revenge. Would you have done what I did? Tell me in the comments below. And if this story found you when you needed it most, remember, your healing begins the moment you choose yourself.